Imagine a day like any other, living in a small town. Stores line the streets, offering their goods and services. Customers go from place to place. Everyone knows everyone, and you wouldn't have it any other way. You might even have a grand courthouse with a statue in front. And then one day, it was like the town never existed. Just one natural disaster can change everything. From floods and tornadoes that destroy property, diseases that come from nowhere and wipe out the community. The train that brought tons of people no longer stops at your town. Or a new highway bypasses it completely. All of these things can destroy what generations created. Sometimes people start over, and other times they leave the ruins behind. Come along for a road trip, looking for traces of the past, as we explore the ghost towns of southern Indiana. No one lives without water, and for that reason, towns of the 1800s would start around springs of clean drinking water. But the same element that starts a town can also end it, and this is the story of English Indiana. Originally called Hartford, the town was established in 1884. It was named after William Hayden English, a lawyer and statesman born at Lexington, Indiana. It had a large number of businesses with many amenities. But despite its noble beginnings, you start to see a theme as you drive through town. Today, there are no businesses here. All the older buildings are in ruins. From 1959 to 1990, the town was hit by 6 major floods. People would rebuild over and over. But it was clear that the natural cycle would never end. The reason? Winding through town is Blue River, and any significant amount of rain upstream would flood the town of English. So after the flood of 1990, much of the town was either demolished or moved to higher ground. All that remains in the low area is a statue of William English. And the whisper of an Indiana town that once was. While natural disasters have wiped many towns from existence, others leave intriguing hints along the road ahead. When you drive the back roads, you never know what you'll find. Sometimes, you don't know what you found even when you do. Case in point, the village of Young's Creek, north of English. Founded in 1867, it was originally called Unionville, but since there was already a town by that name, the Postal Service would not grant a post office. They named it after Joseph Young, a pioneer that settled here in the 1820s, and the namesake of the creek. The post office they fought for was discontinued in 1976. You see many abandoned buildings, but it's unclear what happened. Sometimes a village forms, and over time, people leave for better opportunities. People lose jobs and can't pay the mortgage, become sick, and have to live with family, or go to a nursing home. People often pass away, and no one wants the home in the country. Or sadly, they have no living relatives. As an outsider, There are so many stories and histories that I'll never know, but at some places, the fates are more than obvious. The town of Marengo is best known for Marengo Cave Park, one of the most beautiful show caves in the world. Much like parts of Kentucky, the entire town sits on a cave system, with city caves sitting right next to the road. Originally named Big Springs, Marengo was founded in 1839. As it's always had less than 900 residents, it is the very definition of a small town. And for a bit of obscure history, Marengo was named after the Battle of Marengo in Italy, fought between Napoleon Bonaparte and the Austrians. Because, well, why not? But in 2004, an F4 tornado destroyed 75% of the town. Winds were in excess of 200 miles an hour, perhaps as much as 260. To say the least, there are many ruins to see, including the entire downtown. Over 20 years later, downtown Marengo still looks like a war zone. You can imagine the life that used to be here and will never likely return. There's an old Masonic lodge on the west side of the street. It looks like people could have been here yesterday, and at the same time, many years ago. Everything in this world is in tender balance, with only one event waiting to tip its fate. The town of Greenville was founded in 1816. Once a prosperous town, it tried to be Floyd County's seat, but someone in New Albany offered a bell for a courthouse, and that was the deciding factor. The town is most famous for John Ford. He was a runaway kid from Louisville that not only made his home here, but married the boss's daughter. Out of the Greenville Station building, John started making pie safes. It's the oldest brick building in Greenville. He went on to manage a fleet of steamboats, people calling him Captain Ford. But another business would make him world famous. Pittsburgh plate glass. He and his son perfected how to make plate glass. Your car might even have the PPG symbol on your side window. But John never forgot his roots, and when he heard of a need back home, he left a lasting gift. The Methodist folks took him in as a young man, and when he heard they needed money for a church, he paid for this one to be built in 1899. But he didn't want his name on a plaque. He asked them to instead name it after Matthew Simpson. Does it ring a bell? Matthew was a bishop in the Methodist Church, a close friend of Abraham Lincoln. He was the Billy Graham of his time and a trusted spiritual advisor. After Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he delivered the eulogy in Springfield, Illinois. It's called the Simpson Memorial United Methodist Church and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And yet, neither Matthew Simpson or John Ford ever saw the building. But wait, there's some weird history. On March 26, 1908, the town experienced a massive fire. It jumped from building to building. By some miracle, the church was not affected, yet everything around it burned to the ground. The town never recovered to its former glory. Today, the church sits as a quiet witness, still standing over 120 years later. There's an old general store on the corner, one that was still open back in 2009, but is now closed. Above the front door was a gorilla mounted in a cage. It was even there long after the store closed. Then one day, the cage was busted open and the gorilla was gone. I kind of miss him. The town's centerpiece is the Greenville Christian Church, and in front of it, a large lot where buildings used to be. Beside it is a Masonic lodge, where leaders of the community met in secret. That made plans for generations that now lay in Greenville's cemetery. And now homes and businesses stand on top of 1800s history. Driving along Main Street in Borden, you'll find the last remnants of the 1800s. It was named New Providence in 1816 after Providence, Rhode Island. That was the hometown of pioneer John Borden. As a large strawberry farming area, trains used to stop along Main Street to be loaded up by farmers. But today, the train tracks have all been removed to make a walking trail. You'll see an old bank, storefronts from a bygone era, buildings that were often modified for various purposes, and ones that hint at a graceful past, such as the Borden Mansion. John Borden had a son named William. He became rich after discovering a silver mine out west. He then came home and built this mansion. You can see it in this early photo. But William was more than a miner. He was a very educated man, a geologist, professor, and one of Indiana's early archaeologists. Next to his home, he built the Borden Institute, an early college for teachers. It later became part of Borden High School before being demolished in 1983. But what remains is his magnificent museum, built in 1900. It held everything from world-class geology to archaeology specimens. It was so well respected that it was visited by members of the Smithsonian. Today, it functions as a community center. On one side is where William Borden's mother had a restaurant. But the museum is truly a sight to behold. After William Borden died, much of the collection was sent to the Smithsonian and Field Museum in Chicago. the fossil collection alone was considered one of the finest in the world. How I would have loved to have seen it in its glory days, with prehistoric artifacts, ancient coins, and other curiosities. Unlike the Alamo, it even has a basement. Simply a wonderful insight from over 120 years ago. While much of the town has simply changed with the times, it suffered 3 major tornadoes. In 1974, the town was hit by an F5 tornado, otherwise known as the Hand of God, removing everything in its path. It was hit again in 2004 with an F2 tornado that hit the north side of town. And yet again in 2012 with an EF4. These winds were up to 200 miles an hour. Just a quiet resonance, recalling no past offenses. In 1994, the town of Providence was renamed Borden in honor of William Borden. I discovered the town of Campbellsburg by accident on my way to Cave River Valley. It was originally named Buena Vista, after the Battle of Buena Vista in Mexico, not Walt Disney. The town was incorporated in 1851, renamed after Robert Campbell that laid out the town. By 1880, it had just 386 people, and by 2020, only 529. The town was laid out expecting that the railroad would run through it, and thus bring a lot of business. But those days are long gone, like many other towns like it. On the east side of the road is a beautiful Queen Anne house, one of several in town. This was not a shanty town by any means. It's hard to believe that just a few years ago, this was scheduled for demolition. You can see hints of what used to be here. Back in the old days, it had 2 secret societies on Sycamore Street. The first being an International Order of Oddfellows Hall. The second, a Masonic Blue Lodge. You can only wonder what they were up to. In towns like this, what's left gives us an impression. And our imagination has to fill the gap, making us wonder what used to be there and what's now missing. When I was in my late 20s, I went out for a drive on a sunny day. I'd seen this place on the map called Fort Ritner, and in my head, thought it was like one of those frontier forts I'd seen in the movies, like Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone. Established in 1857, Fort Ritner was named after Michael Ritner, a railroad foreman of the Big Tunnel just down the road. In its heyday, about 1,000 people lived there. It was a pretty happening place with all the comforts of home. It had a train depot, hotel, places to get something to eat, shops to buy what you needed, as well as churches, saloons, and a doctor's office. You could even get a haircut. But when I got there, all I found was the Holland General Store. It had these creaky old wooden floors, tall ceilings, and smelled wonderfully old. I got a Coke in a glass bottle, just like the good old days. I thought to myself, what a great old place. It was both the first and last time that I'd be a customer. Today it's someone's home, no longer a place for weary travelers. All the other buildings of this mini metropolis are now gone, victims of floods and fires. But once upon a time, something was here. I know it was. Wasn't it? But unlike Fort Ridner, other towns have more than enough evidence. Tunnelton is likely the most interesting ghost town in southern Indiana. It not only has tons of abandoned places, but an amazing amount of history. It was a hub for the Underground Railroad, as well as the setting for the Wilson Gang Massacre of 1882, where 3 gang members were killed. Add to that an unsolved murder mystery and a ghost story or two. Founded in 1859, it was named Tunnelton due to the nearby train tunnels. The only remaining one is the Big Tunnel, built in 1857. It's a massive 1,731 feet long. As it curves in the middle, you cannot see from one side to the other. Even on the brightest of summer days, the center is pitch black. Some people hide in the cubbyholes for the thrill of a locomotive flying past them. That's a pretty dangerous thing to do. I would not recommend. Many say it's haunted by the ghost of Henry Dixon. Before the tunnel was lined with bricks, his job was to walk the tracks and make sure rocks hadn't fallen to the track. Both the vacuum and vibration caused by these trains is extremely powerful. In 1908, Henry's body was found some 200 feet inside the tunnel, with his lantern still lit beside him. Someone had killed him. Everyone in town knew who did it, but no one ever talked. And today, many walk the tunnel to try and see the ghost lantern, presumably carried by the ghost of Henry Dixon, the night watchman. When I went a few years ago, I was pretty sure this was a tall tale, until I saw it. It floated about 13 feet above the tracks. I couldn't see any wires or anyone holding it. The real deal or some kind of phenomenon? It was time to go. The fanciest house in town is the Alfred Guthrie Mansion. It's now a bed and breakfast. Also notable is the United Methodist Church, built in 1891. And my favorite, one of the smallest post offices that you'll ever see. Established in 1860. Tunnelton is not totally deserted. As of 2024, the population was 75 people. However, most of the town is in ruins. This is all that's left of Tunnelton High School, built in 1957. It's been abandoned for many years. There are numerous abandoned homes. And the remnants of a few storefronts from 1910. I was impressed by the fancy wood tables and shelves from over 100 years ago. Abandoned, neglected, and forgotten. Mitchell, Indiana is most famous for Spring Mill State Park. The village itself was abandoned in the 1800s and rebuilt in the 1930s. Mitchell is also famous for astronaut Gus Grissom, who grew up here. It has the largest limestone rocket in the world. And a little over 100 years ago, Mitchell was quite a cultural hub. Trains arrived daily from all over the country. It had a bustling downtown with many shops. But as they say, things have changed. Nearly all of these are empty. A town has to have something to draw people in and spend money. That's what keeps a town going. One of the biggest draws used to be the Mitchell Opera House, completed in 1906. Big stars would come to town, perform here as a testing ground before they went to the big cities. After those days winded down, it was used for many other things, from a storage facility, a teen nightclub, to even county hall. In the 1980s, it was renovated back to an opera house. That lasted until 2012. The building condition became so bad, even infested with bats, that the city planned to tear it down. But in 2014, it was sold to Hoosier Uplands for $1. It was then renovated to its former glory. It now functions as an entertainment venue once again. I'd like to think that as long as anyone cares, there's hope for the small towns. The town of Oolitic is famous for limestone. In fact, it's home to the biggest limestone deposits in the world, with quarries starting in 1830. This is the world-famous Empire Quarry, where all the limestone for the Empire State Building was quarried. "200,000 cubic feet from this hole to New York City." The town of Oolitic was established in 1896. The town was named Limestone in 1888, but when they applied for a post office, there was already a Limestone, Indiana. The name Oolitic is based on the word oolite, a type of limestone. And about every old building in town is in fact made of limestone. The 1930s cartoon character Joe Palooka stands next to City Hall. Limestone was once big business, but that industry has faded. Schools were consolidated, and Oolitic High School was abandoned. It's being converted to business space. I can only speculate what this fortress-like building once was. I would guess a firehouse based on the large openings. but with the right upgrades, it would definitely make a great house. I'm confident that in times past, there was much more to see in Oolitic, and much history lost over time. The town of Silverville was established in 1855. Some say it was named after the Indiana silver mine legend, where a mine full of silver is hidden in the woods. Going online, I've only been able to find one picture from the 1990s, when it still looked like somewhat of a town. But even the post office went out of business over 120 years ago. I visit every few years and look at the Silverville General Store. All these years later, I'm surprised that it's still there. This was 2015. And this was only 1 year later. Around it are homes that are being reclaimed by nature. Just a few years ago, someone was living in this one. Here's the store in 2022. And 2023, overwhelmed by weeds and tiger lilies. Like many places I've visited, time is not on its side. Scotland is a town I found completely by accident. I passed a sign along the road, and a voice inside told me to turn around. Established in 1837, it was named Scotland, as so many settlers were from Scotland. There's a lone storefront, making me wonder if it was once part of a larger row of buildings. It's now a private residence. Beside it is the historic Scotland Hotel, built in 1879. And just down the street, a building that could have been a general store, restaurant, or a barbershop. All that's left is an untelling shell from over 180 years ago. As of 2020, the population was only 98 people, a history quietly fading in the distance. I drove nearly 100 miles to Worthington to see an obscure piece of history, a branch from one of the largest sycamore trees that ever lived. Not tree trunk, branch. This is really big. I can only imagine what kind of monster the tree once was. But while I was there, I found remnants of a town established in 1850. It was named after Worthington, Ohio. But when a town has over 1,400 people, can you really call it a ghost town? Or maybe just parts of it, and the true joy is in the finding. To me, it's an adventure. But for those that live here, they're hometown memories. Why are we fascinated with ghost towns? Like ancient tombs, pyramids, and Greek temples, it's an attempt to unravel a mystery. We're fascinated by what used to be and isn't anymore. And it seems like the less we know, the more we want to know. With hundreds of miles to explore, southern Indiana does not disappoint. Maybe it's time for a road trip.